Okay, today is a very special interview for me. We get to speak to somebody whose work I've kind of followed for a while. I really like the things that he does. I like the collaborations he's involved in. His name is Markus Reuter. We just talked about him a little bit ago when we did a interview with Tobias Reber. I'm very excited to get a chance to talk to Markus Reuter. Hey Marcus, how's it going?
Hey, I'm fine, thank you.
Why don't we start this off by having you tell us a little bit about what you're up to right now?
I'm currently on tour with a prog rock trio called Stickmen with Tony Levin and Pat Mastelotto, and we just started touring 2 days ago, and we're playing mostly on the East Coast and Canada, and then in the Midwest. It's like a 5 week tour total for me, and it's really going wonderfully well. Like even after the first couple shows, I think we have the material back because with an international trio like this, we hardly ever get time to properly rehearse. So, but we're getting better at just not starting all over again every time we get together, but we're basically even getting better as a band as we continue playing.
Sure, you get to kind of build on your previous work, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It's so much fun, and I have to say, like just before we started talking, there's a piece where we have like a 3 against 7 polyrhythm,
Hmm.
and and I actually wrote that as some sort of exercise for myself in a way, and then Tony's the guy playing that part on stage. But it's amazing how, like, if you play something that actually used to be some sort of study or exercise piece in front of people for 500 times, how suddenly you really, really know what you're doing, and it really becomes part of, and that's really like something I really enjoy about live performance is that I also consider it to be some sort of a tool for personal development.
Right. So, you've been working with Pat Mastelotto for a while, right?
Yes, since 2005 actually.
When did Tony Levin get into the mix on that? How did you
Um,
meet
that,
him?
yeah, I mean the funny thing is like I had met him a couple times before that, but that was mostly with some misunderstanding involved, where somehow like I was following him to his hotel because it was also my hotel and stuff.
Oh, right.
And no, but anyway, I got recommended to Tony by the California Guitar Trio in 2010. And when in Stickman there was another player before me, and the California Guitar Trio recommended me, and obviously Pat had played with me before, so it was um, and I mean, it's interesting when Tony and I first met. We really basically on that first day we wrote the biggest hits that we're still playing to audiences, and it went very well. And he's classically trained. I'm classically trained, and um, yeah, I mean, we really like each other.
Sure, that's cool. Well, it's funny because there's something about the Stickmen combo that the internet thinks is something I'd really like, right? Because like whether it's Facebook or different search engines or whatever, they always are recommending when you're touring or when a new YouTube video comes up or whatever. For some reason, it's like that combination of people and the music and stuff. It knows that that's what I want, which on one hand is nice, on the other hand is a little creepy that it follows me that closely, right?
Yeah, it is creepy, but it does work, and it's almost like by what you're typing on your computer,
Right.
the internet can predict what you're thinking somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Now you've also already have had you're like one of the most prolific people that I've ever seen, has ever come on my radar. And so
Hmm.
you've actually had a bunch of releases already come out this year. The collaboration you did with Robert Rich,
Hmm.
Lift the Feather to the Flood,
Yes.
that came out, I think, in April, maybe.
Yeah.
And I think you had at least one solo work come out too, right?
Yeah. That
Is
was
that-
Falling for Ascension,
Yes.
which I recorded with Tobias Reber, and a group called Sonar, and it's out on Nick Birch's Ronin Rhythm Records label. Then there is an album with Pat Mastelotto called Face, one of my major works, I'd say.
Okay.
It took 10 years to complete. The thing is that, I think that this year has seen a lot of what I would consider my best music yet. But some of which has been sitting around for a few years. So it's not like what it looks like to people from the outside that I'm kind of always busy. I try to work regularly. That's not a question. But some projects, they're just sitting on shelves for a while, and then as the opportunity arises to release them, they get released, and that's why sometimes there are clusters of releases coming out.
Sure.
And also, I have never been part of the traditional music business, which I think is a very good thing for me. And so I have always had the freedom. It didn't matter if there was demand for what I was doing, and I didn't ever even consider that there would be some sort of demand for what I do. It's true. I always thought that I'm an artist in the sense of fine arts, even. It's not. I never ever really considered myself to be a musician or performer in the first place, more an explorer, a scientist, an artist in that regard.
So it's interesting you say it that way because, first of all, over the history of musicians, there has been sort of like the patronage model where people were support the artists in the same way that for at least some small period of time, record companies supported musicians, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you put it that you're almost calling yourself an explorer seems to make a lot of sense to me because you do kind of push envelopes and you do it in your way. You don't necessarily chase the market around, right? You instead do what your soul tells you to do and you hope that people listen to it. Now, does it seem like people are actually kind of coming to appreciate your style of music more now?
I think so. I think so. However, it's still a very, very small group, or at least let's say it's only a very small group that I know of.
Hmm.
You know, I I'm I'm pretty sure there is some let's just call it underground movement of people who listen to my music, or however, like it's still really, really small. On one hand, it's scary.
Hmm.
On the other hand, it inspired me to just change my business model a little bit, and I've just started a subscription service to my music, and I'm also in the process of withdrawing some releases from the public, which I think is the right way for me to go, because I don't expect to have a breakthrough by somebody discovering my music by chance.
Hmm.
It's just not happening that way with the way that the internet works as a distribution system. It's
Right.
it's the big illusion that the internet is just like, I mean, it is a blessing. For me, it certainly is a blessing, but also it sets limits that you cannot really easily pass without lots of money.
Interesting. So when you say that, so this is very interesting because I noticed on your website you have this VIP membership thing, which
Yeah.
is sort of like an opportunity for your fans to sort of engage with your music directly,
Yes.
get specific releases, get unreleased material and stuff like that. When you talk about pulling some of your stuff from public availability, is it to refocus that to your membership, or is it just simply to try and
Yeah.
reduce the amount of stuff that's out there so that people aren't sick of you by the time they come to your site?
Exactly. It's both.
Uh-huh.
It's both. Yeah. And that's the whole idea, that it allows me to choose how I want to be represented in the public, or what side of my music I want to see represented in the public. And then those people that know about me and know about the range of the stuff that I'm doing, they can sign up to my page and they will get all sorts of stuff, like all of the live recordings. And I mean, the thing is that nowadays, and since I've developed um, as a musician and producer, so much over the years, whenever I make a live recording, it usually is good enough to be put out as an album. And when I say good enough, that's it actually means it's great. I don't want to really say that about myself, but that's the challenge I have. Like, like when I sit down and play, it's usually very, very good.
Well,
And
and now the technology is such too, so that not only does is the performance likely to be good, but also it was probably recorded sufficiently well that
yes,
it would be a useful release.
exactly. That's what I mean. Like
Right.
everything nowadays, everything like technology and also skill comes together in me in such a way that it's just presenting me with new challenges.
Right.
And I think that this VIP subscription model is a very good way to be able to focus, you know, like what I'm focused, that just the what I want to project to the outside,
Hmm.
and still have the wide variety of output, or make a wide variety of output available to those who really already are introduced to me, have been introduced to me.
Well, I like that as an idea too because it means that you don't have the opportunity of like have this idea of like kind of maintaining or controlling how people are going to see you from the outside, and then once they're drawn in being able to open up a lot of yourself, because sometimes I always worry that it's like if just for fun I did something that was just sort of like a silly music track, right?
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
almost scared to have it be available anywhere in case somebody listens to that as the first time that they hear my name,
Yes.
and then they're like, "Oh, I just really hate that guy's stuff," right?
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
or I do something so experimental, and then like uh, a lot of people are just like, "Well, I can't even make sense of his puzzle pieces," right?
Exactly. And what I find interesting is, you've just been comparing pieces of music that you did.
Right.
However, if you're thinking more about it, like people who listen to music, what they do is they come up with an idea about you as a person.
Right.
They are drawing conclusions from the music, and that was like a few years ago. That was a big revelation to me, where I was trying to put myself into the listener's position. I was thinking, okay, if I was to hear this music, what would I think about that person?
Oh.
And that was interesting. Like where sometimes some people gave me feedback like, oh, this music sounds cold to me, or whatever, stuff like that. And I can also see that some of the music that I'm making maybe has this sort of distant feel to it, and I'm talking about like emotionally.
Hmm.
And the funny thing is that as a person, I'm quite the opposite. Like, let's just say people like fall in love with me very easily. I'm a very generous person, and
Right.
I'm always there for people. And it's kind of interesting that my art is generally projecting a completely different image.
It makes sense because when I listen, whether I'm listening to music or I'm listening to someone on a podcast or I'm reading someone's book or whatever, I
Mhm.
am developing a mental image of what that person is like. You're
Yes,
absolutely right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that what I need to do is to use that to my advantage.
Hmm.
So just knowing that my music does feel cold to some people, I think it's a good thing. Like if you're looking at the contemporary art, fine arts world, I'm sure a lot of what I describe is happening there. Like, some people just working with, let's just say, very cold surfaces. Let's say chrome or rusty iron or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
You would think, you'd get a certain image about a person, but there's really no relationship, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that I think is kind of interesting is that if there's a if there is a difference between the person and the work, I think it actually makes both more interesting, maybe. Because
Yeah.
because you're like, well, that's really interesting that a person who I found very warm is doing something that sounds cold, or vice versa. And
Yes,
I wonder what that represents, and I wonder how can I hear the warmth in what I originally perceived as coldness and stuff like that. It makes for a more complex context, I think.
exactly, exactly.
That's really
I agree.
interesting. So you're, as an instrumentalist, you are primarily known as a touch guitarist.
Yes,
Yeah, I mean, to the point where you actually have an instrument that you help design, right?
yes. It's been an interesting journey for me. I started out as a purely a music lover, a composer, let's say. My love for music triggered the idea that I wanted to create music that I needed to hear. So I became a composer, and that was at a very young age. Like the album "Falling for Ascension" that I mentioned earlier, those motifs used for that album were written when I was 13 or something. So like in '85 or something. It's very interesting. I've been a composer first, and then I studied a little bit of classical guitar, but I never practiced. I was just like talented enough to know how to read music, and I could play a little, but I never practiced the instrument from a technical point of view. In 1991, I ended up going to a guitar craft course with Robert Fripp, and that really changed my world a little bit because I learned about practicing there and what it does and what it can do for you. And that was still with an acoustic guitar. However, I spoke with Robert then, and I got the idea because I liked like Tony Levin's playing back then already, like on King Crimson tracks like
Right.
Elephant Talk, for example. And
Right.
and so I asked Robert about playing the stick, and he said that he likes it very much, and then if he were younger, he would love to play the stick, and so somehow that inspired me to pick up the stick. I got a spare one from Dragon back then, and I started playing the stick. The interesting thing was that, and it still is interesting, that there hasn't been like a musical tradition for the touch style instrument,
Mm-hmm.
just to use a more general term.
Right.
The way that Emmett Chapman approached it, that he kind of suggested to people how to play it,
Mm-hmm.
which somehow I thought was a problem because I was even in my first year of having the instrument, I went to several workshops, and I saw that people were hitting a ceiling very very quickly with that instrument, and that made me very very sad because I really was so in love with the idea of the instrument that seeing people fail at actually playing music on it, just to oversimplify things, it was really hurting me. And so I had to make a decision. Either I really go for it and I see this as my research project, or I drop it completely. And I stayed with it. I developed my let's just say the technique for the instrument. I started exploring how do you actually play a note here? How do you
Sure.
start a note? How do you stop a note? How do you play a loud note? How do you play a soft note? People had never thought about those things before. Interestingly enough, I mean, and yeah, but the stick had only been around for 20 years then. So uh, anyway, so it was really like pioneering work I did there, and it's really great that after almost 25 years of playing, I've developed a very efficient system where I can show people even in one lesson what they need to learn in order to understand what makes the touchstone instrument the touchstone instrument. Because it's also misleading because people look at it and they think it's a guitar, it's a bass, or maybe some people say it's more like a piano,
Right.
but it's neither of those.
Sure. Well, so I have, boy, that just launches me into like 50 different questions I'd like to ask. But let me start off with this. In watching people work with the stick, you said that they hit a ceiling relatively quickly. What was the cause of the ceiling? Was it playing technique, or was it the layout of the instrument, or was it choices that Chapman had made? What did you think was the limiting factors?
It's a combination of things. First of all, it's basically two sets of strings on one fretboard,
Hmm.
and you have separate outputs for those. So basically, that already suggests that you kind of have to play two parts at the same time.
Right, right.
Okay,
Yep.
that's not a bad thing. I'm just describing, yeah,
Hmm.
and also it has a fourth tuning and a fifth tuning combined on one neck.
Mm,
Back then, it had either 10 or 12 strings.
right.
Then there are the, just say, like the physical ergonomics of the instrument, which were and are not ideal, I think. So, for example, the Chapman Stick is attached to the body with a belt hook, which is stiff. So it basically, the instrument does not move on your body, and I can see what the idea is behind that.
Right.
However, it really does not represent what like a musical instrument usually is. A musical instrument is meant to vibrate and oscillate, and it's also meant to vibrate and oscillate with you.
Right.
And so, if it's fixed to your body, it just makes things harder. I was thinking about it, like, and I think the only other musical instrument that's really fixed to your body is a glockenspiel in a marching band.
Right. I
You know?
Yeah, my son was in a marching band, and the glockenspiel, and then those like quad drums are
Yeah.
attached to the body, and that is about it.
I think it's just that I really have to say I love the idea of the Chapman Stick. I think the design of the Chapman Stick, like visually, is cool and
Hmm.
appealing. However, there's also the factor that since it's looking so cool and it sounds so cool, yeah, it has this let's say one great sound, and I love that. However, that is also stopping people from actually making music with it because you just need to put your fingers down and move them, or just play a few notes without moving up and down the strings, and you get something that sounds cool.
Right.
And that's also a problem, because you just imagine if you have a stick, you're cool already. You don't need to learn to play. Yeah, it's a simple psychological thing that's happening
Right.
there that
Right.
stops people. So that's why when I started developing my instrument 10 years ago, I went to the luthier that I worked with and I said, I would like our instrument to look 100% like a traditional instrument, like
Right.
a traditional guitar instrument. And I want you luthier to only use traditional techniques to build this instrument, etc. And so that's how my instrument, the Touch Guitars U8, was developed. Obviously, we keep improving on it, but the original concept of making it like a traditional guitar instrument that belongs to the guitar family, that was a very, very good call. Because, people pick up the instrument, it's extremely ergonomic, it moves really on the body, it has a great sound, it gives you access to more traditional guitar and bass sounds as well. And when people pick it up, they just start playing. And it's always a joy to see that some of the obstacles that I saw the stick introducing have been lifted.
Sure. Now, that's a really interesting way to go because one of the things I noticed even on the Touch Guitar site is that they show people that use it as if it's almost like a standard guitar, like holding it and playing it in that way, and other people who approach it almost like a stick, playing their
Yes.
hands up the neck and stuff. And that now I understand the importance of that because you felt like with the Chapman Stick that sort of like demanding a certain kind of playing, and even the two output system and stuff
Yeah.
implied a certain result, and it didn't allow the individual musician to come through. That's
Yes. Yes.
that's an interesting perspective, and it's especially interesting considering your work because when I listen to your work, you have some stuff, especially when you're playing in prog like groups. You have
Hmm.
this very intricate, shaped, and designed sound and output. In other cases, like when you do the collaborations with Robert Rich or with Ian Bodie,
Hmm.
you have a very ambient, smooth, glassy, or glassine almost quality to things. You're, it seems like you're able to take the techniques and the instrument and apply it in many different ways. And so that helps me understand why you went down the road of designing your own instrument.
Yeah, correctly, and also as you can see that the music is first for me,
Hmm.
and I mean that's really what makes the instrument that I designed such a great instrument because I really don't have much of an attachment to the instrument as an invention rather than as a tool.
As a tool for expression, right?
Yes, yes. And
Very
that's
interesting.
really the big difference. I mean, like if and if people ask me, hey, what's the difference between your touch instrument and other touch instruments? And like really the most honest answer is my instrument was developed by somebody who plays music,
Right, right.
and that just makes a huge difference.
How is like the U8 instrument? How is that? How does that differ? Obviously, the eight represents it has eight strings, right?
Yes, yes.
How is it different from a standard guitar? Is it like tuned in straight fourths or something? What is like the primary differences as a if a
Yeah.
guitarist was going to approach this instrument? What's the primary differences?
Okay, the primary differences are that it's an eight-string guitar, or you could say baritone kind of guitar
Hmm.
that has a bass scale length and
Oh,
has a wide range of notes available, and it's tuned in fifths. So the lowest string is a low B flat that's below a six-string bass, even,
mm-hmm.
and goes up to a high D, which is the 22nd fret on an electric guitar.
Oh my.
One of the really cool things that Emma Chapman also thought about was to have a part of the stick tuned in fifths.
Mm-hmm.
However, the way that he's set it up is with the bass string in the middle. So basically, the strings get higher towards you on the bass side of the
Mm-hmm.
stick, and
Right.
so I could see the benefits of that tuning immediately when I got the instrument. And what I did is I just simply turned things around and put it in the traditional order, with the low strings being closer to me and the high strings further away from me. And the instrument is tuned mostly in fifth. And what it does, I mean, if you think about it, we have four fingers per hand. And the way that I want to approach a musical instrument is with all eight fingers, almost as if it was one hand. That's how great piano players play. They don't
Right.
think in terms of the left hand is always playing a bass part,
Right.
or the right hand is always playing a chords or a melodic part. It's that's just the physical limitation, because you have the low notes on the left and the high notes on the right. However, with the touch guitar instrument, since it's basically many keyboards, yeah, it's multiple strings
Mm-hmm.
which have ascending pitches on them. That's why you can completely forget about the concept of register attached to a certain hand, and that's why I'm the fifth tuning is so great, because just if you're putting just imagine like uh, eight half steps make a fifth interval. So that means with four fingers per hand, you're covering, if you're putting the hands next to each other, you're covering the interval of a fifth on a single string. And that means if the instrument would be tuned in fourth, you'd be playing diagonally going up to the headstock, and you would rather quickly uh, fall off the fretboard, let's
Yeah, I was
say.
gonna say you run out of real estate, right?
Exactly. And with the fifth tuning, basically it's you're going diagonal up the neck with gravity, let's
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
and it's just the most wonderful feeling, and it has such a great open sound. The intervals and the overtones are slightly sharp because of the fifth intervals, so it
Mm-hmm.
has that really really beautiful ringing sound to it. And also, since we're like on a normal guitar, the fifth tuning is pretty limiting, because you cannot easily reach all intervals with just fretting with the left hand. But if you're fretting and touching with both hands at the same time, you have access to all the intervals easily. So it's really the perfect tuning for a touch style instrument.
Interesting. I was going to ask if why you wouldn't have just approached using a standard guitar with fifths.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing touch style on a standard guitar, then that's not a problem.
Right.
However, if you're picking and fretting, just some things are very very hard and almost impossible to do.
Sure. Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Very interesting. So now, as we've been talking, you've talked about how you had some classical training, how you were talented enough to kind of make it through until you went to this guitar craft course, which kind of opened your head to a new way of thinking.
Yes.
But I'm curious. The other thing I would say about you is that you seem to have a very adventurous ear, right? I mean,
Hmm.
I've heard you again. I so often I've heard you in collaborative work, right?
Yeah.
Because you collaborate a lot.
Hmm.
But one of the things I would say is that you seem to not be worried about putting yourself in a lot of different musical contexts, right?
Yes.
And that implies to me that that your background, in addition to being one of learning to play an instrument, you're not just sort of like a technique monkey, right?
Hmm.
You are a very thoughtful and very, I would say, very ear-oriented player. I always hear
Yes.
you slot yourself in really nicely. What in your background put you in a position to be comfortable in so many musical environments? I mean, growing up, were you around a lot of music, or was this something that just you've developed over time?
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's a combination of things that led to where I am now. So first of all, I was born in the early '70s, and my mother was listening to the radio all the time, and she was making mixtapes, recording from the radio and stuff like that. And so a lot of the classic music from the '70s is part of my DNA.
Hmm.
And I remember that like the first vinyl that I ever put on was the White Album by the Beatles. I'm not a big Beatles fan, but somehow like there's this a lot of the musical tradition, and like the Beatles were such an adventurous band. Already that gave me a good start.
Right.
However, it really was the discovery of Mike Oldfield's music that led me on this path, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with Mike Oldfield's music. He put out a box set, which had like his first three albums plus an album, funnily enough, called Collaborations, that has him playing with other people, and in particular with David Bedford. David Bedford was a contemporary classical composer. I think one of the greatest composers of the last 30, 40 years, let's say. I really, really fell in love with his music, and it already had this attitude of exploration and also combination of orchestral sounds and electric guitar and children voices, professional musicians and amateurs, everything I like about music, where basically you can bring anything into the mix to create an exciting sound.
Okay.
I first listened to an extract from Star's End, which is one of David Bedford's great pieces, when I was 10 years old. And then suddenly, I was lucky that I had a piano teacher for just maybe 6 months or so. I was actually learning to play keyboard, plastic keyboard. And I was lucky that I had a teacher who introduced me to Olivier Messiaen. So I learned about the really cutting edge music at a very, very young age. And that's, I guess, why I developed the open ear early on, even before I became, or I got to the age where I had to kind of decide what I wanted to do with my life. And I think it's also that basically my ear from birth, my ear is not, hasn't been very good. And I had to work to open it up myself.
Hmm.
And so that really was the foundation. But when it comes to because you were also connecting that to playing the instrument, when I started exploring the technique on the touch instrument, what I did was I decided from the very beginning that I did not want to learn to play music on it. I never wanted to learn scales or anything. I just wanted to learn how to move on the fretboard. I saw the fretboard like a stage, and my fingers are dancers who want to be able to go from A to B in a beautiful way. And it didn't really matter what notes were under the fingers. It was more about the movement. And that's how I developed my physical being to be able to just freely move, which then led to the fact that I can just if inspiration strikes, I can just move my fingers and music comes out of me. And I am very good at knowing what I'm playing, but I don't have to. I can switch that completely off. I can just go for a gestural approach. And it's so interesting because like some of my music that sounds very, very structured or very, very thought through is actually improvised, or has been done without knowing what I'm doing, let's say.
Hmm.
And vice versa. I really love exploring the extremes. I love bringing things together that normally wouldn't fit. And so each collaboration I'm involved with puts me into a different field of challenge.
I studied, and I studied hard as a guitarist for years, and I
Hmm.
got to where I had very good facility and very good technique on the instrument,
Hmm.
but I always struggled to find a find a way to attach that to my musicality, and I never really thought about it being that practicing the movement, practicing or thinking outside of the terms of bang out a scale as quickly and as technically precise as possible
Hmm.
was the important thing to worry about. I mean, and in
Yeah.
a way, if you take a look at like the way that musicians are being taught, like through internet courses or whatever, it seems to be all about physicality and all about technique and very little about, hey, stop and think about the music that you're actually trying to create. That's a
Yeah,
really
but you
interesting.
know what? It's actually I agree with you, but the way that it looks like from the outside is the opposite. Because what people are trying to teach you technique music, via musical examples. So because they think that their students need to have a success early on,
Right,
so they
right.
teach you how to play, I don't know, Kashmir by Led Zeppelin.
Yeah,
Okay?
right.
So rather than letting the student develop the strength in the fingers to get a good sound to play Kashmir, let's say,
Hmm.
they let them play Kashmir without the student having any facility with the instrument. And what that leads to is some sort of frustration. Yeah, that sound is coming from my fingers. However, it doesn't feel good to me. And
Yeah.
that is a problem. Also, if you think about it, the things that sound good to us are the things that we already know. So that means like
There's
if
very little challenge involved, right?
yeah, but it's not just about the challenge. It's about that you're putting a limitation on yourself, or the teacher puts a limitation on what your ear and also your body is allowed to experience. That's one of the biggest problems in music education is that people are trying to teach or are teaching how to recreate a certain sound.
Hmm.
That's what like a lot of jazz is about, or jazz
Yeah.
teaching is about, jazz education is about. How can I recreate the sound of a Charlie Parker solo? So scholars have analyzed what Charlie Parker has been doing and put that into a system. Even though like Charlie Parker would have never ever thought about that probably that way.
Right.
So it's really there's an industry of how can I recreate a certain sound, and that's really the biggest problem for guitarists especially. Guitar is there are so many idioms, and I'm saying there are so many idioms, yes, but it's a limited amount of idioms, and once you get into learning one of them, it's really, really hard to break out of it again.
Yeah.
And I got so lucky. I had a really fresh start. I had lessons with Robert Fripp, who was also very much focused on the physics of playing.
Hmm.
And I had this instrument that there was no tradition for, and so it was just an ideal field that I could explore and come up with a technique. And like I said, the technique is not geared towards playing any music in particular. It's just about how can I play a beautiful note, and how can I play any order of beautiful notes. That's what made me the musician that I am.
Interesting. That's a really inspiring story. So now, how do you take that,
Mhm.
and how do you take I mean, so you worked hard and you've worked thoughtfully on developing your own voice. It goes way beyond technique. It goes way beyond notes and certainly way beyond the gear, right?
Yes, yes.
How do you then, since I've already mentioned you've done a lot of work as a collaborator with a lot of amazing people.
Mhm.
How do you bring that into a collaboration, and how do you know ahead of time if a collaboration is going to work, or do you not know ahead of time and you just do it and see what the result is?
That's a really good question. I mean, obviously, I don't know if something's going to work, but I believe that what we consider to be the making of the music is actually it's much a wider thing that we believe it is. It's not just the fact that you sit down and record together. It's not just the fact that you sit down and write together. It's also the relationship you have with the people that you're doing that with. To me, it's if I cannot connect with a person, then I'm not going to collaborate with that person.
Hmm.
But if I'm making that connection, then I know that the collaboration is going to work out. It's like the process of making music does not start with actually creating sounds. It starts somewhere else. It starts within you. It starts in the interactions with people. It is around us always, you know. So what I guess I developed just an intuition for what works and what doesn't work for me. You know, I tend to say like I am music. It's not that I'm making music. I am music, and music itself is kind of is resonances, is oscillations, and the music is kind of finding the context that it needs on its own. It's not, I have nothing to. I really don't have to. It's basically effortless to find the people that I can work with.
Right.
You know, and right now it's really interesting. I'm allowing other people to be part of that process. So I've started working with Leonardo Pavkovic of Moon June Records, and he's a great guy. He basically has ideas for people to play together, and he puts teams together to record albums. And so last year I met Mark Wingfield, a British guitarist, and it's been wonderful to have somebody else suggest collaborations.
Right.
And it just involves trust and also faith in yourself. And yeah, I'm not sure if that really answers your question,
No,
but
it does. And I mean, this intuition is a funny thing because it's a hard thing to describe, but it's an easy thing to feel in your stomach, right?
yes,
And
yeah,
again, I think maybe we've all become, or we've all been sort of like taught, or it's been told to us that we have to be very calculated and very prescribed in how we approach our musical careers. Be careful and thoughtful, but also,
mm,
supermarket oriented and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that I appreciate about this discussion is the sense to which you allow people to come to you.
mm,
You're not trying to apply marketing approaches to musicality to drive the way that you do the thing that you do. And I really
mm,
appreciate that a lot. Because in a
yeah,
way, I'm getting almost immune to people who too overtly market themselves as somebody I should listen to,
yeah.
right?
You know, and I mean, it just also doesn't work anymore.
No, it doesn't.
It's just something that the music industry, the business was creating as an illusion to control artists and the listeners,
Right.
just to be able to make money of both the artist and the listeners. It's
Well,
it's
yeah,
true. It's
yeah,
true.
absolutely.
And I mean, just coming back to the intuition thing, what we tend to forget is that we as like humans as pattern recognition machines, we have more available than just the conscious, the things that we understand with our conscious being. There's also the subconscious, and really what I mean when I say intuition is that there's also a way to be comfortable with what our subconscious understands, even if it doesn't show up in our conscious. You know what I mean? It's
Hmm.
just believing that, and this is something that really I've gotten. Some people laugh about that when I say that I know what's right, or so I used to say I know what music is.
Hmm.
And but what that means is that I'm starting from a point of saying yes. I'm saying yes to the process from just drawing energy from my subconscious, where I say, okay, my subconscious can deal with this situation, even though I might not be able to follow the chords that this great jazz player is going to play. However, my subconscious is much faster than what I think than the what the conscious part of me thinks, and I can just allow my subconscious to take over and just play along.
Right.
And that's what I mean with intuition. So it is even a technical thing in a sense. It's not just the emotions. It's not just the stomach. It's also just trusting in yourself to be much more than what you think you are.
Sure. Well, Marcus, that is inspiring. That is, you've got my head full of stuff now, and I appreciate that. It's unfortunately our time is already up, but I just before we go, do you have anything coming up that you would like people to know about in terms of either releases? You're on this tour right now, and are you? What do you have coming up after that?
Really, the most important for me is that I've just switched to the subscription model that I mentioned before. So really, what I would like is to have more people know about it and maybe sign up for it.
Sure.
That's really my big project. So rather than looking at individual releases, what I'm doing is I'm looking at building this community, and yeah, you can find it as markusreuter.com, and then you can find it under the music tab.
Right.
And yeah, I'm planning on putting out a release almost every month there from the archives. And there's like I mentioned, the collaboration with Moonjune Records. There's going to be a new trio album with Mark Wingfield and Asaf Circus called Lighthouse coming out in September. And there's always new things happening. And I'm currently working on an album of, and actually I'm calling it an album, a suite of string quartets. That's going to be out sometime next year. And so I hope that people will stay tuned, and I also hope that at some point I'll start writing some articles on my website. And yeah, there's also a newsletter option, and so that's closest to my heart, that people kind of join the community.
Sure. Well, it sounds really exciting, and it sounds like a really thoughtful way to approach kind of speaking to your fans as well. I really like it, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much for that. And with that, we will say goodbye. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Darwin.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening again. I'm sorry this was out late this week. I had a little family excitement to dealt with. I hope that you enjoyed hearing from Markus Reuter as much as I did. If you haven't had a chance to check out his site yet, you really need to do it. His subscription model is really great if you want to be really into his stuff. He really promises to bring something unique, and I like it as an interesting way to interact directly with fans. So, again, check it out, markusreuter.com. Beyond that, thank you so much for continuing to listen. Please make sure that you continue to share this with your friends, family, everyone else. They all need to know about it. They really do. Have a great week. See you next time. Bye.